Cue the cheesy intro.
Are you tired of your drums sounding weak and pathetic?
Yeah.
Well, in this tutorial series, I'm going to show you how to take your drums from sounding like this to this. Let's get started.
All right.
How's it going, you guys? Today we're going to dive into how I mix the snare for this drum mix. A quick word of warning for any of you who are just getting started in mixing for the first time or very new to it. So some of the settings you're going to see today, don't think that you can just write them down and apply them to your snare and it's going to sound exactly like this. Every snare is going to sound totally different. Every audio file is going to sound totally different and require different moves to get the result that you're after. But with that being said, I'd rather you guys pay attention to the concepts and the fundamentals, the general areas you see me going to and addressing with the processing. All right, there's definitely a lot to go over here, so let's dive right in. All right, here's a quick recap of what we're working on. All right, so let's start with our snare top. I'm gonna take all the processing off and let's listen to it by itself. All right, as you can see, even on the waveform, I've already manually gated a lot of this. Now, the main reason you want to gate a snare drum or a drum in general is you want to keep the crosstalk or the bleed from the other drums from getting into the mic. When I'm listening to the snare top, all I want to hear is the snare, not the kick or the toms or the cymbals. As you just heard, it's going to sound extremely unnatural by itself, but in the context of a mix, you're going to have the overheads and the room sound filling out the rest of that drum. And another technique to make it sound a little less unnatural is to leave the snare bottom ungated, as you can see here. That way you're still getting the full ring out of the snare and some crosstalk or bleed from the other drums, but I don't mind it on the snare bottom as much. The snare top, though, I want it to be a very short attack and use the room or reverb to fill out and extend the length of the drum. Alright, so first in our chain is a multiband compressor, and we're using this as an expander on the high end to reduce the cymbal bleed after the initial attack. So what we're doing basically is side chaining it to this frequency range, and once it exceeds the threshold, it'll bring up this band to let the high end through and then quickly bring it down so that any of the cymbals that are coming in will be reduced in high end. Alright, let's take a listen to before and after. So you lose a little bit of the high end, but the cymbal bleed is much less harsh. All right, moving on, we got the EQ. This is one of my favorite plugins. So these moves might look a little crazy, but if you pulled up like a SSL EQ, you'd be doing moves that look like this, but it doesn't look as scary because there's no graphical interface. Just because it looks insane doesn't mean it's not appropriate for the source tone. Do whatever it takes to get there. All right, here's a before and after. All right, I'm just going to bring in each band one after the other while it plays back. So we're just cutting out all of the low end below 100 Hertz. There's nothing there that we really need in the signal. Cleaning up the low end, getting rid of any extra rumble that might be there. Next, we got our 200 Hertz, which is always like the body or thump of the snare drum. Just always sounds good. Somewhere around there, anywhere between 150 and 200. So let me bring that in and out. Obviously, it sounds a little woolly and overdone right now, but we're going to correct that with these boosts up here. Between like 300 and 600 or so, 700, you can get a lot of weird honk and ring. So I like to do a lot of narrow cuts here to get rid of any of the stuff that's just sustaining for too long. Let's actually take a real quick listen on what this band is actually getting rid of. That stuff just sucks, so get rid of it. As you can hear, we've got a thumpy, full sounding snare drum, but not a lot of crack or bite on the top. We're going to address that right now. So we're just boosting some 1.5K and a shelf starting at around 2K, just extending all the high end. And we're also losing a bit from this multi-band that we had earlier, so we're having to do quite an aggressive boost here. I find that snare drums are just very dull sounding on the way in, and you just normally have to boost a lot of high end to get them to cut through. So again, before and after. Alright, next up in our chain, we just got some saturation from the virtual channel. Got on the Brit 4K, which is like an SSL E-channel series console. Nothing too crazy. Turn that noise off because it sucks. Alright, let's see what this is doing. Not that much. Not sure why I ended up leaving that on, but it's there. It sounds cool. Next up, we got a transient designer. These things will be your best friend when it comes to drums. They just make it sound like your drummer's hitting way harder than they actually did. Freddie did a great job here hitting very consistent rim shots with a lot of power, but I always end up wanting more. I just love huge sounding, fat, and punchy drums, so always use a transient designer. And I'm just bringing up the TAC like 1.5 on here, whatever that actually equates to. It's fairly subtle. You could go much more extreme on this, and it starts getting very pokey. In this instance, I just felt like I didn't need that much, but it still added a little something. So something you'll see across a lot of my mixing is a lot of different plugins, but some of them are doing very minuscule moves. It doesn't look as extreme as it is, but it doesn't really matter in the end. Whatever you need to use to get to the sound you want, go for it. If that means one plugin, that's great. If it needs 20, then cool. Alright, last in our chain, we got the JST clip plugin. This is an awesome way to cut off any of the pokiness and retain that power and sustain that you worked hard to get. I'm not sure if it's doing much on the per channel basis, but I just like to end my chains with that just in case there's any overs or really pokey elements. I just rather would tame them down individually. And then I also have one on my drum bus and drum stem just in case as another safety measure. Yeah, it just smooths it out a little bit, gets rid of some of that pokiness. All right, so let's take one last listen to the snare top without any processing. And all the plugins engaged. Let's also do this in the mix. Alright, so this brings us to the end of this episode. Hope you guys got some value out of this. Be sure to leave a like and comment below. I'd love to hear from you guys if this was helpful. Let me know any tips that you guys have come across in your own drum mixes. I'm always looking for new stuff to learn. In the next episode, we're going to dive into the snare turbo track and the snare bottom. See what I did to get them to fit with the snare top and complement it. Thanks for watching, you guys. I'll see you in the next one.